I think it's the most stupidest thing in the world. You call it a police action back home, right?
It made America laugh during wartime, a comedy about war that became the most watched finale in television history. But behind the laughter, darkness consumed the set. Actors battled for control. One star walked away and never looked back. And in the final episode, it nearly didn't happen at all. These are 20 secrets about MASH hidden for decades. And the bonus, a scene so controversial, CBS refused to air it for 30 years. Attention, all personnel. Number 20, CBS wanted to cancel after 6 episodes. When MASH premiered in September 1972, CBS executives were convinced they'd made a catastrophic mistake. The show was too dark, too political, too intelligent for mainstream audiences who wanted simple entertainment. Early ratings were disastrous, barely cracking the top 50 shows. The network received complaint letters from viewers who found the medical gore disturbing and the anti-war themes unpatriotic during the Vietnam era. By episode 6, CBS executives held emergency meetings about canceling the show and cutting their losses. They believed MASH was too sophisticated for American audiences, that people wanted escapism rather than commentary about the futility of war. But the show had one powerful ally, CBS programming chief Fred Silverman, who had championed MASH from the beginning. He fought the board, arguing that the show needed time to find its audience, that quality television required patience. He convinced them to give it one full season, moving it to better time slots and promoting it more heavily. Slowly, ratings improved as word of mouth spread about this different kind of comedy. By the end of season 1, MASH had found its audience. And by season 2, it was a certified hit. The show that nearly died after 6 episodes became one of television's greatest successes, running 11 seasons and changing what sitcoms could be. Number 19, Alan Alda and Gary Berghoff hated each other from day one.
Check this place out.
Alan Alda and Gary Berghoff played best friends Hawkeye Pierce and Radar O'Reilly on screen, their friendship forming the emotional heart of early seasons. Off-screen, they despised each other with an intensity that shocked the cast and crew. The animosity started during the first table read when Berghoff, who had played Radar in the MASH film, acted superior to television newcomers, treating the role as his personal property. Alda, who was establishing himself as the show's creative leader, resented Berghoff's attitude and territorial behavior. Their personalities clashed fundamentally. Alda was intellectual, politically liberal, and believed in collaborative creativity. Berghoff was difficult, emotionally volatile, and demanded special treatment based on his film experience. During early seasons, they'd barely speak off camera, communicating only when scenes required it. Crew members learned to keep them separated between takes to avoid confrontations. The tension exploded repeatedly, with screaming matches in dressing rooms and complaints to producers about each other's behavior. Alda found Berghoff unprofessional and childish. Berghoff thought Alda was arrogant and knew it all, trying to control everything. Their scenes together required extraordinary acting, pretending to be close friends while genuinely hating each other. When Berghoff left the show in season 7, claiming burnout, the real reason was partly his inability to work with Alda anymore. Years passed before they spoke again, and even then, the relationship remained coldly professional. Two men who'd played best friends, but could never stand each other in reality. Number 18, McLean Stevenson was fired and lied about leaving. McLean Stevenson played Lieutenant Colonel Henry Blake for 3 seasons, providing bumbling leadership and comic relief. Then in season 3, his character was called off in one of television's most shocking moments, dying in a plane crash on his way home. For decades, the story was that Stevenson chose to leave, wanting to pursue other opportunities. That was a lie created to protect everyone involved. The truth was that Stevenson was fired. By season 3, his behavior on set had become intolerable. He'd show up late, drunk, or not at all, forcing production to work around his absences. He'd forget lines, blow takes repeatedly, and show no remorse or effort to improve. The cast covered for him initially, but eventually his unreliability endangered the entire production schedule. Producers issued warnings that Stevenson ignored, believing his character was too important to fire. They proved him wrong, terminating his contract and culling Henry Blake in a deliberate message that no one was irreplaceable. Stevenson was blindsided, having assumed his misbehavior would be tolerated indefinitely. He immediately spun a narrative about leaving voluntarily to pursue his own sitcom, saving face publicly while privately devastated. The other sitcoms he tried all failed quickly, and Stevenson spent the rest of his career regretting the behavior that got him fired from MASH. He died bitter, never forgiving the producers for firing him, but never acknowledging that his own actions had forced their hand. Number 17. The laugh track was added against everyone's wishes. MASH's laugh track remains one of television's most controversial decisions, a studio-imposed addition that cast and creators fought against desperately. Larry Gelbart, who developed the series, insisted that comedy about war shouldn't have canned laughter, trivializing serious moments. Alan Alda agreed passionately, arguing that laugh tracks insulted audiences' intelligence and destroyed dramatic tension. They presented their case to CBS repeatedly, showing episodes without laugh tracks and arguing the comedy was stronger without artificial prompting. CBS refused every time, citing research claiming audiences needed laugh tracks to know when something was funny, that without laughter cues, viewers wouldn't recognize jokes. The network held absolute power, and the laughter track that was added over everyone's objections. Gelbart and Alda did negotiate one concession: no laugh track during operating room scenes, preserving some dignity for medical moments. But everywhere else, the artificial laughter played, undermining powerful dramatic moments and making genuine emotion feel cheapened. The cast learned to hate the laugh track, watching episodes where serious points they'd carefully crafted were interrupted by inappropriate laughter. Some episodes tackled heavy topics like death, addiction, and trauma, yet still had audiences laughing at dark jokes that weren't meant to be lighthearted. When MASH finally aired in syndication and on home video, versions without laugh tracks became available, revealing what the show was meant to be. Those versions are dramatically superior, proving Gelbart and Alda had been right all along about audiences not needing artificial cues. Number 16. Larry Linville left because he was being bullied. Larry Linville played Major Frank Burns, the incompetent antagonist everyone loved to hate. For 5 seasons, Burns was MASH's punching bag, the butt of jokes and the target of pranks. On screen, this created comedy. Off screen, it created an environment where Linville was treated with contempt by cast members who confused actors with character. The bullying started subtly, with cast members continuing to mock Linville between takes, making jokes at his expense that went beyond friendly ribbing into genuine cruelty. Because Burns was written as stupid and cowardly, some cast members treated Linville as if he actually possessed those qualities. Alan Alda was particularly guilty, using his authority as the show's creative force to dominate Linville and shut down his input on character development. Linville tried pitching storylines that would give Burns depth and humanity, showing why he'd become so damaged. Alda rejected them all, insisting Burns needed to remain purely antagonistic. The typecast extended to social situations. Cast members would exclude Linville from gatherings, not inviting him to dinners or parties where everyone else bonded. He became isolated, the outsider even among people he worked with daily. By season 5, Linville was miserable, dreading going to work and feeling dehumanized by playing a character everyone despised. When his contract ended, he refused to renew despite offers of more money, choosing his mental health over financial security. He left. He never looked back, spending remaining years taking diverse roles that proved his range, while trying to forget the show that had made him famous but miserable.
Number 15. The show's anti-war message nearly got it banned.
MASH's anti-war stance was deliberately subtle in early seasons, buried beneath comedy to avoid controversy. But as the show gained confidence and the Vietnam War remained divisive, the messaging became more explicit and more dangerous. By season 4, episodes were overtly criticizing military leadership, questioning the morality of war, and depicting soldiers as victims of political decisions beyond their control. This created problems with the Department of Defense, which had initially cooperated with production, providing technical advisors and equipment. The DoD withdrew support in 1975, declaring MASH unpatriotic and harmful to military recruitment. They pressured CBS to cancel the show or tone down criticism of military institutions. CBS, to their credit, refused, but the political pressure was intense. Conservative politicians and veterans groups organized letter-writing campaigns demanding cancellation, calling the show propaganda that undermined troops. Some local CBS affiliates in conservative markets refused to air certain episodes, substituting reruns or other programming. The controversy threatened the show's survival, but something unexpected happened. Actual veterans, including Korean War veterans he depicted, came to the show's defense. They wrote letters explaining that MASH captured the reality of their experience, that war was exactly the absurd, tragic waste the show portrayed. Their voices legitimized MASH's perspective and made political attacks backfire. The show survived the controversy and continued its anti-war messaging even more boldly, proving that sometimes taking a stand strengthens rather than destroys you. Number 14. Mike Farrell was hired because he'd work cheap. When McLean Stevenson was fired, the show needed a new commanding officer quickly. The role of B.J. Hunnicutt was offered to several established actors who all demanded salaries the production deemed excessive. CBS wanted a big name to replace Stevenson, someone who could fill the gap left by Henry Blake's death and reassure audiences. But the production company, 20th Century Fox, wanted to save money, having grown frustrated with Stevenson's high salary and poor work ethic. Mike Farrell was a working actor with steady television experience but no star power, and critically, he was willing to work for significantly less than other candidates. He was hired primarily for financial reasons, not because he was the best actor available. Farrell later discovered that several more talented and experienced actors had been considered first, all rejected because they knew their worth and negotiated accordingly. This created insecurity and resentment that Farrell carried throughout his time on MASH, knowing he was a budget decision rather than an artistic choice. He overcompensated by trying too hard to prove himself, pitching storylines and character ideas that producers often rejected. The relationship between Farrell and Alan Alda was complicated by this dynamic, with Farrell feeling like a junior partner who'd never earned equal respect. To his credit, Farrell grew into the role and made B.J. Hunnicutt is an essential part of MASH's success. But he never forgot how he'd been hired, and the knowledge that he'd been chosen for his cheap salary rather than his talent haunted his entire tenure on the show. Number 13. The final episode was nearly destroyed by fire. The series finale of MASH, titled Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen, became the most watched television episode in American history. What fans don't know is that the episode nearly didn't exist because the footage almost burned in a catastrophic fire. During filming in October 1982, a wildfire broke out near the outdoor set where most of the 4077th camp scenes were filmed. The fire spread rapidly through dry California brush, approaching the set while the cast and crew were filming crucial scenes. Production was evacuated, with people fleeing as smoke filled the air and flames approached. Firefighters created a fire break, barely stopping the blaze before it reached the set and equipment trucks containing already filmed footage. If the fire had reached those trucks, weeks of work would have been destroyed, with no time to reshoot before the scheduled air date. The entire finale would have been lost, forcing either a rushed replacement or canceling the planned conclusion entirely. The cast and crew watched from safety as firefighters saved their set, realizing how close they'd come to disaster. When filming resumed days later, everyone worked with renewed urgency, aware that another fire or disaster could still destroy everything. The final episode aired in February 1983 to over 100 million viewers, making television history. But those involved never forgot how close they'd come to the finale, literally going up in smoke, taking MASH's conclusion with it. Number 12. Jamie Farr wore his own clothes as Klinger. Jamie Farr's portrayal of Corporal Klinger, the soldier who wore dresses trying to get discharged for insanity, became one of MASH's most memorable characters. What viewers didn't know was that many of Klinger's outfits were actually women's clothing from Farr's own family. Farr came from a working-class background where nothing was wasted, and when the costume department needed dresses for Klinger, Farr offered clothing from his mother and wife, rather than letting production spend money buying or renting. The gesture was partly practical and partly sentimental, Farr wanting to incorporate his real life into the character. Some of Klinger's most iconic dresses were pieces Farr's mother had worn to church or special occasions. garments with genuine history and meaning. Wearing them added authenticity to Klinger's desperation, making the character's scheme feel real rather than purely comedic. The costume department eventually took over completely as Klinger's wardrobe became more elaborate, but those early dresses remained Farr's personal contribution. Years later, Farr revealed he'd kept some of the dresses after filming ended, storing them carefully as mementos of the role that had defined his career. The dresses represented both the character's journey and Farr's own, a working actor who had brought pieces of his life to work and transformed them into television history. Number 11. The show's medical advisor was a real MASH surgeon. MASH employed Walter Deschel as medical advisor, ensuring surgical scenes maintained accuracy and authenticity. What made Deschel invaluable was his background. He'd actually served as a surgeon in a mobile army surgical hospital during the Korean War, living the experiences MASH depicted. Deschel didn't just advise on medical procedures. He shared stories about the psychological toll, the dark humor surgeons used to cope, and the impossible ethical decisions war forced on medical personnel. Many of MASH's most powerful storylines came directly from Deschel's experiences, adapted with his permission to fit the show's characters. He described operating on soldiers barely older than children, watching men die from wounds that would have been survivable with better resources, and the guilt of choosing who to save when everyone needed help simultaneously. His stories were often too dark for television, requiring significant softening to remain palatable for audiences. But even toned down, his contributions gave MASH authenticity no purely fictional show could achieve. Deschel also trained the actors, teaching them proper surgical technique so their movements in operating scenes looked professional rather than theatrical. Alan Alda became particularly close with Deschel, spending hours discussing the moral complexities of being a healer in a war zone. That relationship deepened Hawkeye's character, giving Alda insights into the psychological damage combat medicine inflicted on caregivers. When Deschel died in 1993, the MASH cast attended his funeral, honoring the man who had given their fictional hospital its soul. Number 10. Harry Morgan replaced McLean Stevenson against his will.
I think it's the most stupidest thing in the world. You call it a police action back home, right?
When McLean Stevenson was fired and Henry Blake killed off, the show needed a new commanding officer. Harry Morgan, who'd played a deranged general in an earlier episode, was offered the role of Colonel Sherman Potter. Morgan initially refused, having zero interest in joining MASH. He was busy with other projects and didn't want to commit to a long-running series at his age. But CBS and the producers wouldn't accept no. They pressured him relentlessly, calling daily, increasing salary offers, and eventually threatening to damage his career by spreading word that he was difficult to work with. Morgan finally accepted under duress, resentful of the coercion but needing the steady income. His early episodes reflected his reluctance, with Potter coming across as stiff and uncomfortable. But something unexpected happened. Morgan discovered he genuinely enjoyed the role and the cast, finding a creative home he hadn't anticipated. Potter became one of MASH's most beloved characters, with Morgan earning an Emmy for the performance. He stayed through the show's end, transforming from reluctant hire to passionate advocate. Years later, Morgan admitted the forced casting was the best thing that happened to his career, proving that sometimes being pushed into something unwanted leads to unexpected fulfillment and success. Number 9. Loretta Swit was contractually trapped on the show.
Morale of this military establishment.
Well, that's a very serious charge. Get Klinger.
Loretta Swit played Major Margaret Hot Lips Houlihan for all 11 seasons, but she desperately wanted to leave after season 7. Swit had grown frustrated with the character's limited development and wanted to pursue film opportunities that kept being offered and rejected. She'd been cast in several movies that conflicted with MASH's filming schedule, roles she had to decline because her contract gave the show priority over everything else. The most painful loss was being cast as the lead in a major film that could have transformed her career, only to have MASH's producers refuse to adjust the schedule. Swit begged to be released from her contract, offering to take a pay cut or return for guest appearances, anything to pursue other work. The producers refused, insisting she was essential and irreplaceable. What they didn't say was that her contract was deliberately restrictive, designed to prevent her from building leverage or options. Swit explored legal options, but discovered her contract was airtight, trapping her completely. She stayed through the finale, professionally delivering excellent work while privately grieving the career she might have had. After MASH ended, she struggled to find substantial roles, typecast as hot lips and lacking the film credentials she'd been prevented from earning. She later spoke about feeling imprisoned by the show, grateful for its success, but bitter about the opportunities she'd been forced to sacrifice.
Number 8. The show's continuity was deliberately ignored.
Hey, fall in. Officers in front. District personnel in the rear. Shall we inspect?
MASH ran 11 seasons depicting a war that lasted 3 years, an impossibility the producers acknowledged but chose to ignore. Characters celebrated multiple Christmases and New Years, aged beyond what the timeline allowed, and referenced events that couldn't have happened within the show's supposed time frame. Writers received regular notes about continuity errors but were told explicitly to prioritize good stories over chronological accuracy. The decision was controversial among cast members who wanted the show to feel grounded in reality. Alan Alda particularly pushed for better continuity, arguing that ignoring timeline problems undermined the show's anti-war message by making the war feel endless and abstract rather than finite and specific. But producers prioritized creative freedom, not wanting to limit storytelling possibilities by adhering to strict timelines. This created bizarre situations where characters would reference being at the 4077th for 2 years when the show had already been on air for 6 seasons. New viewers were confused, while longtime fans learned to simply accept the fluid timeline as necessary suspension of disbelief. The decision was pragmatic, but sacrificed some authenticity. When planning the finale, writers finally addressed the continuity by making it clear the war was ending, giving concrete closure that the show's middle seasons had deliberately avoided. Number 7. William Christopher's faith created constant conflict.
Hawkeye's questioning the major on a point of anatomy.
William Christopher played Father Mulcahy, the camp chaplain, with gentle sincerity that made him beloved. But Christopher's real-life devout Catholicism created constant conflict with the show's writers and producers, many of whom were atheists or agnostics, uncomfortable with religious themes. Christopher fought repeatedly to ensure Mulcahy was depicted respectfully, not as a joke or naive fool. He rejected scripts that mocked faith or portrayed religion as superstition, using his contract to demand rewrites that treated belief seriously. This frustrated writers who wanted to satirize religion alongside all other institutions, viewing Christopher's demands as censorship. The tension exploded over episodes dealing with doubt and moral compromise, where writers wanted Mulcahy to question his faith fundamentally, while Christopher insisted the character would struggle but ultimately remain faithful. The disagreements were sometimes bitter, with Christopher threatening to quit if his character was used to mock Christianity. Producers usually compromised, respecting Christopher's conviction, even when they disagreed with his theology. The result was a surprisingly nuanced portrayal of faith in a show otherwise cynical about institutions. Mulcahy became MASH's moral center, a believer whose faith was tested but never broken, reflecting Christopher's own refusal to compromise his values for easier storytelling. Number 6. The laugh track covered major script problems. The controversial laugh track served another purpose beyond CBS's belief audiences needed it, covering dialogue problems, timing issues, and scenes that didn't work. During editing, producers discovered they could use laugh track placement to hide weak jokes, mask awkward pauses, and create rhythm where scripts fell flat. If a joke landed poorly with the studio audience or didn't work in editing, strategically placed laughter could trick viewers into thinking it was funnier than it actually was. This became a crutch that let writers get lazy, knowing the laugh track would compensate for weak material. Actors noticed and complained, frustrated that their careful timing was being overridden by artificial laughter that played whether their delivery worked or not. Alan Alda was particularly vocal, arguing the laugh track prevented them from learning what actually worked versus what needed fixing. He believed it made everyone complacent, accepting mediocre material because the laugh track made it seem acceptable. His concerns were proven right when episodes later aired without laugh tracks, revealing that some jokes and scenes didn't actually work without artificial support. The show's best moments needed no enhancement, but weaker episodes relied heavily on laugh track manipulation to feel successful. When MASH is remembered as great television, it's despite the laugh track, not because of it. Number 5. The cast knew about the finale's twist. Months early, the series finale featured a shocking revelation about a traumatic incident Hawkeye had suppressed, dealing with themes of psychological breakdown and repressed trauma. The twist was that Hawkeye witnessed a Korean mother smother her baby to prevent its crying from revealing their location to enemy soldiers. This dark storyline was decided months before filming, but Alan Alda insisted the entire cast be told immediately, despite producers wanting to keep it secret for authentic reactions. Alda argued they needed time to process such heavy material and prepare emotionally for filming scenes that would be genuinely traumatic to perform. The cast spent months discussing the storyline, debating whether it was too dark, whether MASH should end on something so devastating. Some cast members thought it was perfect, the ultimate statement about war's psychological cost. Others felt it betrayed the show's spirit, ending on trauma rather than hope. The debates were intense and emotional, with people genuinely divided about whether they were making the right choice. When filming finally happened, everyone was prepared but still affected. The scenes were emotionally draining, with Alda's breakdown feeling genuinely real because he had spent months imagining and preparing for that moment. The advanced knowledge allowed for better performances, but also meant months of anxiety about ending their beloved show in such darkness. Number 4. Gary Berghoff, left because of alcohol and pills. The official story about Gary Berghoff leaving CMASH after 7 seasons was burnout and desire to spend time with family. The reality was darker. Berghoff was spiraling into addiction to alcohol and prescription pills, and producers gave him an ultimatum. His behavior had become erratic and problematic, missing rehearsals, showing up impaired, and having emotional outbursts that disrupted production. Cast members had covered for him initially, but the situation worsened until it couldn't be hidden. Berghoff was using pills to manage anxiety and alcohol to sleep, a dangerous combination that affected his memory and judgment. Scenes that should have been simple required dozens of takes because Berghoff couldn't remember lines or hit marks. Producers finally confronted him, offering 2 options: get treatment or leave the show. Berghoff chose to leave, not ready to admit he had a problem or accept help. He spun the departure as voluntary, a personal choice about priorities, but those close to production knew the truth. After leaving, Berghoff's career collapsed as his addiction worsened. He eventually got sober, but not before years of struggle and lost opportunities. He later admitted the MASH years had been his best and worst, success masking problems that eventually destroyed everything he'd built. Number 3, the show's budget was spent on fake blood. MASH used more fake blood than any television show in history, spending a significant portion of its budget on realistic gore for operating room scenes. The production went through hundreds of gallons of stage blood per season, far exceeding what typical medical shows used. This was a deliberate strategy: make the blood and wounds so realistic that audiences couldn't ignore the human cost of war. Early seasons used standard stage blood that looked fake and theatrical. By season 3, the show hired special effects artists who created custom blood with realistic color and consistency that looked disturbingly real on camera. The increased realism created problems with network censors who'd approved the show based on early episodes' relatively tame appearance. As the blood got more realistic, censors tried pulling back, arguing the show was becoming too graphic for prime time. Producers fought back, arguing that sanitizing war's reality was more offensive than showing it honestly. They won most battles, and MASH's operating scenes remained shockingly graphic by 70s television standards. The realistic blood contributed to the show's impact, making viewers confront war's brutality rather than romanticizing it. But it also meant the show was difficult to watch, driving away viewers who wanted lighter entertainment while attracting those willing to confront uncomfortable truths. Number 2. Alan Alda rewrote the finale and took sole credit.
Halloween spirit.
The MASH finale was officially written by a team of writers who had crafted the script over months, developing the storylines and emotional beats carefully. Then, Alan Alda, who was directing the finale, rewrote massive portions without credit or acknowledgement, taking creative control he wasn't entitled to. Alda changed dialogue, altered scenes, and modified the central trauma storyline to fit his vision, often overruling the credited writer's objections. The writers were furious, watching their work transformed by someone whose name wouldn't appear in the writing credits, but whose ego demanded total control. Alda justified it as directorial prerogative, arguing that as director, he needed to ensure the episode worked visually and emotionally. But his changes went far beyond normal director input into actual rewriting. Some writers wanted to protest publicly or demand shared credit, but doing so would have created controversy that might overshadow the finale itself. So, they stayed silent, accepting that Alda would receive praise for work he'd appropriated. When the finale aired to massive acclaim, Alda gave interviews discussing his creative choices without mentioning the writers whose work he'd taken. The bitterness never fully healed, with several writers remaining estranged from Alda years later, unable to forgive how he'd stolen credit for the finale's success.
Number 1. The show's success made everyone rich except the writers.
They were all wonderful actors. And then the replacements, Mike Farrell.
MASH became one of television's most successful shows, generating hundreds of millions in syndication revenue that continues today. The main cast became wealthy, earning enormous salaries by later seasons, plus syndication residuals that created generational wealth. 20th Century Fox and CBS made fortunes from the show's success. But the writers, who created the stories and dialogue that made MASH great, received minimal compensation. Television writing contracts in the 70s didn't include meaningful residuals or syndication participation. Writers were paid per episode, then forgotten, receiving nothing as the show they'd created continued generating massive profits. Larry Gelbart, who developed the series and wrote many classic episodes, received a small percentage, but nothing approaching his contribution's value. Staff writers got even less, watching actors become millionaires from performing words they'd written, while they earned nothing beyond initial payments. This injustice became a rallying cry for the Writers Guild, leading to strikes and negotiations that eventually secured better deals for future writers. But MASH's writers never benefited from those improvements. They'd created television history and received a fraction of its value, watching others profit from their work. The irony was painful. A show about the exploitation and waste of war enriched everyone, except the people who'd told that story. MASH made America laugh and cry for 11 seasons, changing what television could be and say. Behind the brilliant comedy and drama lived exploitation, addiction, and battles for control that mirrored the chaos it depicted. The show that taught us about war's human cost extracted its own toll from those who made it. A legacy as complicated as the conflict it portrayed.